Good evening. My name is Andrew Berry, and on behalf of the Akron-Summit Council on Holocaust and Genocide Education, welcome to this year's annual Akron-Summit County Holocaust Commemoration and Awards Ceremony, hosted virtually by the Akron-Summit County Public Library. This ceremony will commemorate the Holocaust that resulted in the deaths of 6 million Jews and 11 million others by the Nazi regime and its collaborators. We will also recognize the students whose work is displayed in this year's curated show. First, we will hear an opening message from Summit County Executive Eileen Shapiro.
Good evening. I'm Summit County Executive Eileen Shapiro. Thank you for joining us for the 35th Akron-Summit Holocaust Commemoration, and a special thank you to our distinguished guests, Eva Unterman, Phoebe Unterman, and Dr. Henry K. Knight, and our moderator, Martin Belsky. We're very honored to have you with us, and we look forward to hearing your stories. A special thank you to the board members who work so hard behind the scenes to make this event possible each and every year. As the first Jewish woman in the role of county executive in the state of Ohio, this annual commemoration is particularly important to me. As I reflect on this year's theme, what does the Holocaust teach us about opposing hatred and cruelty? I'm reminded of the responsibility we all have to combat hate and cruelty. In some regards, we have come far in the 76 years since the last Nazi concentration camp was freed, but I fear that many have forgotten, or choose to ignore, or even possibly choose to enable how hatred and cruelty, even on a small scale, can quickly escalate. It is our collective responsibility to make sure that the horrors of the Holocaust and the slow, subtle normalization of hatred and cruelty that led to such destruction are never forgotten and are never repeated. The education of our younger generation is a core tenet of this responsibility. That is why this group, for the last 34 years, has taken care to ensure that the students of Summit County have an opportunity to consider the events of the Holocaust and the genocide through writing and the arts. Our children are our future, and they will shape the world we live in. Each of us must do all we can to make sure that future generations do not repeat the mistakes of the past generations. One must learn from the past to build for the future. I offer my sincere gratitude to the educators and the activists who help our children learn about this important history. While we could not hold a traditional contest this year due to the pandemic, the collaborative projects completed by students have left me impressed and hopeful. We must never forget the Holocaust and how the powerful can manipulate the masses. But remember, we also have power. We have the power to speak up and speak out. We have the power to help create a more tolerant and less judgmental future, and we have the power to impact the destiny of generations that will come behind us. Whether it's simple moments of personal interaction or speaking out in a public forum, every denouncement of cruelty and hate has the collective impact of uniting others for peace in our world. Never forget. Thank you.
Thank you, County Executive Shapiro. And now a message from City of Akron Mayor Daniel Horrigan.
Hello, I'm Akron Mayor Dan Horrigan, and I'm happy to welcome all of you to the 35th year of the Akron-Summit Holocaust Commemoration. For over 3 decades, the City of Akron has been honored to support the mission and message of this event, which has become one of the longest continuously running programs of its kind in the country. This program is not possible without the guidance and knowledge of its steering committee. So let me take the time to thank all of those on the committee and the broader Jewish community for continuing to make this commemoration a top priority. I also want to thank our partners at Summit County and County Executive Eileen Shapiro for continuing to carry this torch with us. The lessons of the Holocaust continue to be just as relevant today as ever, as we witness attempts to dehumanize our neighbors, our friends, and our citizens, or anyone at all. We have to loudly oppose that hatred and prejudice wherever we encounter it. We have to continue to educate our youth about the dangers of that hatred and do everything in our capacity to prevent those tragic events from ever unfolding again. As we all know, 2020 was a very tumultuous year, full of uncertainty, full of fear, and full of anger. If history tells us anything, it's how we react to that tragedy and correct the sins of the past is what shapes a brighter future for all of us. 2020 was a lesson on the importance of taking care of each other and how to unite as a people for the common good. It also taught us what happens when we don't. Learning on our own history is an important part of how we all grow. And now, all of you have lived through a very historical moment. Think of what you've learned and pass it on to others. Thanks to all of you for your support for the Akron-Summit Council Holocaust and Genocide Education and for taking part in today's event.
Thank you, Mayor Horgan. And now a message from Pam Hickson-Stevenson, Executive Director of the Akron-Summit County Public Library.
Good evening. I'm Pam Hickson-Stevenson, Executive Director of the Akron-Summit County Public Library. I am privileged to bring greetings to you on behalf of the Library Board of Trustees and the library staff. The Akron-Summit Holocaust Award Ceremony and Commemoration is a critically important part of the fabric and tradition of our community, and the library is honored to play a role in supporting this annual event. The 2021 theme, What Does the Holocaust Teach Us About Opposing Hatred and Cruelty, is timely and appropriate. We must never forget the tragedy of the Holocaust and must always remember that hatred and cruelty are never acceptable. Thank you for joining us this evening as we honor the memories of those who died and the work of our students in keeping those memories alive.
Thank you, Director Hickson-Stevenson. Dorothy O. Jackson, Deputy Mayor for Intergovernmental Affairs for the City of Akron from 1989 to 2003, together with committee members, led the annual Akron-Summit County Holocaust Arts and Writing Contest every year. Dorothy has presented the Best of the Best Award, which honors a student with an award in her name since 2004. This year, we dedicate all of the curated pieces in honor of Dorothy O. Jackson. Following a word from Mrs. Jackson, we will begin the 2021 curated art and writing show.
Can you tell me a little bit about your involvement with the Akron-Summit Holocaust Contest and Commemoration?
The first one they had, I served as a director of it.
Okay.
And it was wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I had lots of tears because I didn't know anything about the Holocaust.
Okay.
And so when I learned of all the things and all the people that were murdered and homes destroyed, lives destroyed, it was a very, very touching time for me. And I had the opportunity to travel to Israel, and they named a park for me there.
Okay.
And one of the men that went, he said, you know, now your name is here this year. Next year it's going to be somebody else's. But my daughter was recently there. My name is still there. And she said, Mayor Haddad is still the mayor. And as soon as he learned she was there, he rushed over to see her and said, you don't come here anymore unless you bring your mother. And she said, Ma, you know that little tree you planted? She said, it's way up into the sky.
Oh.
Way up to the sky almost. It's just so beautiful. And Mayor Haddad is still the mayor after all those years. And he came over and he told her she better not come anymore unless she brings me. Of course, I don't see that happening, but it would be wonderful if it did. And
But what an honor to see that your name is still there.
It is. And then the first handicap housing in the country is named for me.
Okay.
It's at the corner of Main and Barges Street.
Okay.
Dorothy Jackson Terrace.
And so what was the most proud moment that you had while building and leading the Akron-Summit Holocaust Contest and Commemoration? Do you remember?
The most important thing for me was that I remember was that I didn't realize all those things had happened to so many people and how their lives had been taken away from them. all ages of people, their lives were taken away, and just anger. And so it was very, very touching, and I shed tears over people that I never knew because of the trauma and trouble that they had to go through. And it did happen, and people were that mean that they didn't care about anyone else's lives but their own. And so to destroy them meant nothing to them at all. But it was very hurtful to see, even though I didn't know any of the people.
Okay.
It
So
was hurtful to see it.
what lesson do you think that the students in the community can learn from this contest that they have?
That hate is an evil thing. And you probably heard the expression, acid does more to the vessel it's stored than the vessel it's poured. So while they're trying to destroy someone else, they're actually destroying their lives more than they are in hurting someone else.
Okay.
Tonight, we are joined by a panel of guest speakers and will hear their personal history and stories related to the Holocaust. Speaking tonight are Eva Unterman, a Holocaust survivor, Eva's granddaughter, Phoebe Unterman, and Dr. Henry Knight, Professor Emeritus of Holocaust and Genocide Studies, moderated by Martin Belsky, University of Akron Professor of Law. Their discussion will center around this year's theme: what does the Holocaust teach us about opposing hatred and cruelty?
Hi, everybody. My name is Marty Belsky. I'm honored today to be moderating this group of experts on the Holocaust. Two of these people have been my longtime friends from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and one is my newborn friend, having read her book about her grandmother. Our guests are Eva Unterman. Eva is someone, she'll describe her own story in more depth about her background, but I know her from Tulsa, Oklahoma, where she's been very involved in Holocaust education, and in fact has started a council, started a council on Holocaust education, and helped start a museum in Tulsa about the Holocaust. Henry Knight is a doctor of theology. He was the chaplain at the University of Tulsa, and then he was the head of the Holocaust and Genocide Studies at King. He has now moved back to Tulsa, and that's where he is right now. This is a program to talk a little bit about the personal experiences of Eva, how her granddaughter then turned that around into a book. And I'm going to show you the book if I can. Can you be sure if I can share the screen here? Let me see if I can do that. I know, I'm sure there's a way to do that.
It's there.
Let me just get it if I can. This is the book. It's called Through Eva's Eyes, written and illustrated by Phoebe Unterman, based on a true story. And at the end of the entire program today, you'll be hearing about the opportunity to get that book if you wish. So I hope you'll sort of listen carefully, and we're going to now move on. And Eva, why don't you start and just tell us your story?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Marty, for organizing this. I am sorry, someone is calling. I apologize. I'm moving. Don't know what to do here. Anyway, to tell my story, I guess I am sorry. This phone is ringing. Hopefully, whoever it is. Okay, so sorry. Well, I was born in a large industrial city in Poland called Łódź in Polish. I was an only child. I lived, of course, with my parents and two grandmothers. My father was a businessman. We were not wealthy, but comfortable. I had a very pleasant childhood, and I was looking forward to starting first grade in September 1939, but instead of that, as you all know, Germany invaded and occupied Poland, and being a Jewish girl, Jewish child, I was not allowed to go to school. And I remember how very disappointed I was. I had all my school supplies. I also wasn't allowed to play with my non-Jewish friends, wasn't allowed to go to the park. And eventually we had to wear these yellow stars of David with the word Jude, Jew, on our clothing. So when we were outdoors, we could be easily identified, harassed, and worse, not only by the German soldiers, those were soldiers at first, the Wehrmacht that occupied Poland, but also by some Polish hooligans who now saw an opportunity to harass Jewish neighbors. Not all, mind you, nothing is all. My story is quite unique, because I am one of the few Jewish child survivors who went through the camps and was liberated eventually after several camps. And I will, if I have time, I'll be happy to mention some of them. I was liberated by Russian soldiers
on May 8th, 1945 in Terezin. But before I came to Terezin, I spent 4 years in the Lodz ghetto. Most people know ghettos were prisons, and those of you who have followed a Holocaust education, read the stories, seen the films, know the conditions that were there. The Jewish administration at first tried to keep things as normal as possible. A school was opened, a hospital. There were even some theatrical performances, but that ended very quickly because many people from all over Europe were brought to the Lodz ghetto as they were to other ghettos, and the ghetto was totally sealed off, the most sealed off ghetto in Poland. I have little time, so I will just go through the basics and then please do ask me questions. When I spent 4 years in the ghetto, I remember when we had to leave home. I always tell the students how I had to choose what I could take along. We could only take that which we could carry from our homes. And my mother made these bundles out of pillowcases and put things in their necessities. In other words, grandma's china, baby photos, family vacation photos, all that had to stay behind when we had to leave home and walk towards an unknown destination. So now I'm in the ghetto. Mother, father, I, 2 grandmothers in one dilapidated building upstairs. But my mother, the most, remember the word, resourceful. You had to be resourceful and have connections in order to survive. She found an old dusty pot somewhere in that room, cleaned it up, pulled out one of the sheets, pillows, blankets, and that became my home. I would love to tell you more about it, but I must mention that within a short time, the order was given that children would be relocated to a better place with more food, better conditions, and parents parted with their children because there was so much hunger in the Lodz ghetto. However, no one heard from them again. I remember the time when I was hidden in the water well, which Phoebe illustrated and wrote about in her book. After that, we were supposed to go to a metal factory in Germany, which the German ghetto director, supervisor, whatever his title was, Hans Bieboff, planned on moving the metal factory from Lodz to Germany. And we got on the list. So we left with the very last transport on August 29th, 1944. My parents, myself, one grandma, my other grandma died in the ghetto. Thinking, I didn't know from anything. I was very protected by my parents, but they thought they were going to the metal factory. You have all seen the cattle cars. We were packed in there, and that ride I will never forget. Children were crying, people were getting ill, and I remember that train, that steam engine whistle. And I don't know how long we traveled. Eventually we stopped and the doors opened and we were screamed at, schnell, raus, raus, schnell. As it turned out, we were in Auschwitz. I don't have time or need to probably tell you much about it. We didn't stay there long. The next camp was Stutthof on the Baltic, and we stayed there for quite a while. My grandmother was killed there. Eventually, my mother and I were again moved, this time indeed to a metal factory in Dresden. At Auschwitz, we were separated from my father, but he traveled the same route, totally separate from us. We were in Dresden, working in a metal factory. I was 11. I was sorting bullets on a conveyor belt when February 14th, Dresden was bombed by British and American bombs, and it was a horrendous fire. Somehow, we worked night shift, so we were in the cellar. We managed to come out, and then they didn't know what, I assume they didn't know what to do with us, and there were no more trains available. So we started what is now known as the Death March. We walked along the river Elbe, not knowing where to. Whoever couldn't walk and collapsed was shot on the spot. My mother dragged me along, and eventually we ended up in Terezin, where, as I mentioned earlier, we were liberated May 8th, 1945.
Eva, can I stop for a second?
Of course.
You, before this all happened, you consider yourself to be Polish.
Definitely. My parents were Polish patriots. We were Poles. We spoke only Polish. Our religion was Judaism, but my name was Krysia. I was a Polish girl who was Jewish.
Did you have Christian friends?
If I what?
Did you have Christian friends?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, definitely.
Did they do anything at all when you all got moved out? How did they react when all the Jews were forced out?
Well, now keep in mind, I was 7 years old and very much protected by my parents, so I didn't really know. But my memory tells me there was one girl whose name was Basia, and she and I stayed friends for a while. I also had a nanny, a Polish peasant woman whom I loved dearly. She loved me. And while we were still in our apartment, she used to bring food and other goods from her daughter's farm. So we were lucky that way. Her name was Furmankova.
And when your longest period of time was in the ghetto, right? In Lodz?
Yes. Yes.
And how, I know you were still young, but it was managed by the Jews, the Jewish leaders who managed the ghetto, the leaders who ran the ghetto.
If it bothered me?
So did Jewish leaders run the ghetto?
Yes.
In charge, or were the Nazis in charge?
Well, the Nazis told them what to do. They were responsible for there's a great deal of controversy about Chaim Rumkowski. And when I was in Israel, I got to know Dr. Oh dear, what's her name? It escapes me right now, but I have her name here. I have her book, who has done a lot of studies. That's her specialty. Lodz ghetto, Nazi and Jewish government, if you can say that. Very complicated, very, very complicated. Everything is,
Now, you were liberated, you said in 1945? You were liberated in 1945? Is that
correct. Last day of the war, May 8th.
But you didn't really talk about your experience until the 70s, right?
That's correct. You are right.
Why didn't you talk about it?
None of us, most of us didn't talk. I didn't talk with my family. I didn't talk with my children. It's my grandchildren, the third generation. They learn about it. But Sophie and Phoebe, we talked, you somehow knew much about it. I thought that I didn't want my son and my daughter to grow up, with this burden. I wanted them to be free American kids. So I didn't talk. But then a teacher from, was it Sapulpa? I think Sapulpa called me one day, 1979, and asked if I would speak to his students. And I said, what? Speak? What are you talking about? He insisted. And I started, and then the word got around that there is this woman. There are not many survivors. We didn't even call ourselves survivors. The word Holocaust, or Hank probably knows, we refer to our past as im Lager, in the camp. And then things started happening. And eventually, I had so many teachers, and I worked. So on my day off, I would go to various schools in Tulsa and communities nearby. And then I thought, we need to get these teachers together because they are the ones who will tell our story to the next generation. And that is what happened. And we have a wonderful, we started, many have retired, but we have our Holocaust education director, Nancy Pattis, who was a teacher for 23 years, and 16 of those she taught about the Holocaust at Jenks High School. Well, we're getting new teachers. We continue to tell the story, and now that we have our new Holocaust Center, we will continue to tell. Unfortunately, as you all know, I haven't experienced it personally, but anti-Semitism is again rising its ugly head, so we must continue. My mission is to remember the past and to teach for the future.
Now, you said you've been to Israel. Have you ever been back to Poland?
Yes, as a matter of fact, Phoebe, her sister, and father, we spent a whole month, I think it was July, in Poland. We went to all the places where I have been before, during, and after. And Phoebe wrote and took photos, and we also went, again, both granddaughters, Steve and Ellen, to Israel. We spent quite a while there. I have been to Israel a few times on my own. I happen to have some relatives there, which I didn't know about, but we're in touch.
We'll come back to Eva in a minute, but I want to go to Phoebe if I can to sort of talk about that. Phoebe now is in LA, and she's been involved with theater programs and workshops, an audio festival, a podcast garage, and the Women's Center for Creative Work. And she had a Fulbright for journalists. Tell me, Phoebe, going way back, you were real young when you first started this project, right? How old were you?
Yeah, I think I was like 13 at the beginning.
And why did you do it?
I remember it was a really long time ago, but I was in middle school and I had some sort of project there was like a publishing contest for a children's book publishing house. And I think everyone in our family has heard my grandma's story so much. And it's something that we all, talk about a lot and think about a lot. And so to me, I'm at the age of 13, it was like the most compelling story that I could think of and that I wanted to tell and wanted to work on. So
But then you spent 4 years working on it, and the book didn't come out till 4 years later, right?
Yeah, I mean, there was some trouble with the publishing house. It was kind of like they were reviving a contest that they had done for many years, and so it was a little bit rocky. But also, I did the illustrations, and they did take me forever because
And
they're
the book
really.
itself, I should interrupt. I hope people have a chance. The book itself has lots of illustrations besides the story which you described. We will have that book available for some people. I was able to get some of those books available for people. But when you started this process, you were 13. It took you 4 more years to get it out and get it done. What was your emotional response to hearing the story and writing about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was 5 the first time I heard the story. I remember like being at I remember like being in the dining room table at my house and hearing it. And then like my grandma came and spoke to my sister's class, and I came to, so I was like very much steeped in the story for a long time. And I don't know that I really, I didn't like totally emotionally, I mean, it's taken me like my entire life to sort of emotionally process like what that has meant for my grandma and her life, what it's meant for like my family. I feel like at the time I knew it was like an important story. I knew it was like part of history that was important. And so I don't know that I was like, I mean, I think I was emotionally moved by those stories because I, loved my grandma, and it was like hard to hear these stories that she was telling about what she went through. But I do think it's taken a lot longer to sort of have an emotional reaction to everything.
You are the generation where there has now been a growth of Holocaust deniers. A number of individuals who basically say it didn't happen or it was no worse than anything else that happened during World War II. And you're the generation that we're counting on to keep the story alive through your book and other ways.
And hopefully the generation that brings, is able to talk about like all the other, genocidal situations that have happened. Cause I do feel like we've gotten to a point where there is really good ingrained like Holocaust education for a lot of people. And there's a lot of things that I never learned growing up about, indigenous genocide in the Americas and like about chattel slavery and the legacy of that, that I feel like are also really important to talk about alongside talking about.
You probably know that the Holocaust Museum in DC now has exhibits dealing with other genocides and Holocaust. And almost everybody who sort of teaches Holocaust and genocide education is understanding that it can happen again. But I think there's also some concern, as Eva said, about the return of anti-Semitism across the country, and some of that is being fostered. I don't know if you saw a demonstration that occurred on January 6th, where at least two of the individuals were carrying signs. One dressed up as a Nazi individual, and in the later interview indicated that there was at least two people who, when confronted by a broadcaster, said, "Well, the Holocaust never existed. It was just all made up and sort of didn't really happen." Have you ever had that confrontation personally, Phoebe, with individuals who deny the Holocaust?
Not in like my personal life. No, I mean, I feel pretty lucky to not like have to like, break bread with Holocaust deniers regularly. But no, I have not. I mean, I definitely have there are people in my life that I know that hold anti-Semitic views, not people that I'm close to, but I think it's like very, it's also just connected to like the ahistorical view that a lot of people take. I don't know. I mean, I grew up in like the Bible Belt, so I knew a lot of like evangelical Christians that didn't know a lot about Judaism and had a lot of assumptions, but.
Yeah, well, that gives me a good segue to get to Hank Knight. Hank, I wrote a little piece called.
Can I add one thing to it? Because I did know of Holocaust deniers. I actually had someone from Australia find me and show that the children used me to show that children were not killed in Auschwitz. I was a child and I survived. But Hank, you might remember a professor at TU, his last name was Weber.
Yes.
Okay. Well, you know more about it. I'll be happy to jump in with that story whenever you want me to.
All right, let me get to Hank in a second. Hank wrote a little piece called Finding My Way in Shoah Studies, which, why don't you tell your story a little bit, Hank, about how you got into this and why you got into this and how it's affected your life. You're a Methodist minister, correct?
Yes, I am. I think the simplest way to characterize my engagement is that it's primarily through people and their stories. And it's an interesting combination, I suppose. The primary figure is Elie Wiesel, and I had been exposed to a couple of his fiction works when I was in college. I'd read Town Beyond the Wall and Gates of the Forest and been deeply moved by them, but I hadn't read Night. And eventually was exposed to Night, Dawn, and Day, the Night trilogy, when I was in seminary, and began a long reading process of immersing myself in his work. And at the first institution where I was a college chaplain, I had decided I wanted to invite Professor Wiesel to my campus for a talk. So in 1982, I reached out to him. He came to the campus 6 months later, and eventually we became friends. And he helped me put together my first course on the Holocaust. In fact, he was scheduled to be a guest in my class on a Tuesday in, actually it was the day he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. He didn't make it to class. He eventually met with my class the last day of the semester. And that was in Ohio, Marty, in Berea, Ohio, at Baldwin Wallace. And shortly after that, I got the position at the University of Tulsa. Came there as chaplain and a professor in the Department of Religion, and eventually developed 2 courses that I taught there. One on Elie Wiesel and the other on the Holocaust and its impact on Christianity and Christianity's role in setting up the possibility of the Holocaust. Well, that friendship had continued all through Professor Wiesel's life. I eventually was invited to serve as a reader for the Elie Wiesel Essay on Ethics contest, which is a national contest for college and university students. And I still sit on that committee. Another person who figures in there is Franklin Littell. He's the founder of the annual Scholars Conference on the Holocaust in the churches. And I had, when I finished my doctoral work in 1975, I picked up a copy of Franklin's book, The Crucifixion of the Jews, and read it because I had this conversation going with Professor Wiesel's works. And I was shocked to discover the complicity of Christianity in the fostering of anti-Judaism, which grew into anti-Semitism, and which laid the groundwork for so much of what happened in Nazi Germany.
Wait, why were you shocked?
Because I was shielded from a history of negative portrayals of Jews embedded in my sacred text, embedded in the scholarship that was part of my doctoral work in theology, and that was part of the background of my primary teachers. So it was an unnerving discovery that, much like the unnerving discovery that white Americans have with regard to race, they have to do a slow process of peeling back layers of self-examination, ways in which, as people who benefit from certain kinds of identity-related privileges, where others have to pay for your privilege, you slowly discover things about yourself that are really pretty discomforting. Not uncomfortable, but discomforting. They kind of...
A second, I mean, maybe this is my bugaboo, but I come into contact, unfortunately, with many Holocaust deniers, including some people in Ohio now, but many more when I was living in Oklahoma, wearing different hats. Eva mentioned one person from the University of Tulsa. Why don't either you or Eva talk about that person and how you responded to a denier? How do you respond to a denier? I'll start with Eva. You know, how do you respond to a denier?
May I tell you, first of all, I want to thank Hank. The first Kristallnacht program that I attended was at the Sharp Chapel. I don't know what year that was, but I remember it clearly. And your involvement in all that, it was so very important. And I hope it will continue to be important, coming from someone who is not of the Jewish faith. But I met an American veteran, World War II veteran, Cliff Michaels, who was from Tulsa, and he told the story when he came back from being one of the first to enter Buchenwald. When he came back home, he took some journalism classes at TU, and one of the professors, his name was Weber. I never met him. I have no clue who this man was. He said that the Jews invented what they talk about the Holocaust, that it didn't happen. That made Cliff so angry. He left, went home, got his old uniform out, and every time we were meeting on a moment's notice, he would show up and tell us what he witnessed. This American, non-Jewish, a World War II veteran, what he saw in Buchenwald. To this day, we have a letter that he wrote to his family at home and his uniform, and it's a remarkable story. And I am right now involved in trying to commemorate many of the US soldiers who fought the Nazis, and I consider them, even if they hadn't set foot near a camp, they were my liberators.
Hank, your father was one of those people, right?
My dad was not a liberator, but he was responsible for American GIs having to visit. He coordinated the visits of American GIs to former camps.
Wow.
He ran the Office of Military Government for General Lucius Clay in Berlin at the end of World War II and for the first year after that. He was a staff sergeant and then civilianized to kind of do the day-to-day nitty-gritty running of that office. And they're the ones responsible for coordinating General Eisenhower's decision for GIs and for German citizens having to see the camps so that they couldn't dismiss it as Allied propaganda. I grew up in a household where I would come home from school, tell my dad that I heard somebody talking about World War II and I heard X, Y, and Z. and they're war stories. And my dad would say something like, if they saw what I saw, they couldn't talk about it. And then he would say, don't listen to that. Or we would watch Combat or Gallant Men, two shows on TV at the time about World War II. And my dad would watch, and occasionally he would say, no, it didn't happen like that. Or there's more to that story. And then nothing else would be said. I couldn't ever get him to talk about these things because they were too painful for him. But that kind of trajectory came together as I began to learn from Wiesel, learn from Franklin Littell's work, and then do my own reading and research. Would talk a little bit more. And the interesting thing, and Phoebe, you may be able to identify with this, the person who finally got my dad to talk was my son. It was the grandson who got my dad to open up, because my father felt like the story needed to be told, and he was afraid it wouldn't be if he didn't tell my grandson. But he didn't want to lay the burden on me. And I have a hunch there's some of that that you understand in your ways. But for me, it has to do with, how do I understand myself in relationship to people who are different from me? And as a Christian, my relationship to Jews is tied into how I understand myself in a confessional way. And I had to re-examine lots of things about the ways in which I understood myself that treated Jews in disrespectful ways, and used them in many ways as sounding pieces or almost cardboard identities in order to shape a notion about myself that had problems, had really fundamental problems about it. But it was related to things that were fundamental to who I understood myself confessionally. So I had to rethink lots of what I was taught growing up about what it meant to be Christian in relationship to Jews and Judaism. And that's been my journey.
I want to, if I can get to share screen, I want to show people a little bit more of Phoebe's book, if I can. If I can pull it up here, hold on. Let me see if I can find it.
Yeah, Henry, I was just going to respond and say that it is tough when your religion is a justification for colonialism and violence, which I understand as a Jew with what the state of Israel does in Palestine. So there's a lot to unpack, with your identity and its political uses.
Let me see if I can pull up another thing here, which I had. Well, hopefully I can find it. It's not letting me do it here. I apologize for that. I thought I had done it all, organized it real quick, and maybe not. This is the cover for the book as well. But I do want to show people some of the things going on. That is a picture there. You can see of Eva and Phoebe way back. But I want to show some of the pictures. This is some of the pictures that were done by Phoebe as she described the situation of Eva when she left, and her background and experience, and as she sat down at the table and the script. And then moving things along here, and the attitude and perspectives, and the leaving, and there's the Nazis. I'm not going to be able to show it all. I hope that people have a chance to sort of take a look at it. I just want people to see the kind of book this is. It's really good for people of all ages. And I think with Phoebe, you did a really good job, and even though you're younger, you did a really good job with those pictures. Those pictures are just very, that picture to me, right there, is the one that hits me every time I see it and look at it. Sort of what is going on here, as you have Eva sort of looking back to see what is happening in that scenario and sort of the comfort level and where you go to. I just want to sort of do that and show people that. And before I let people go, let me sort of ask Eva for the future. You and I are getting up there. Do you have any concerns about the future of Holocaust education?
Are you talking to me, Marty?
Yes, do you have any concerns about the future of Holocaust education?
Well, I think that we must continue with it. It is actually becoming as we, the survivors, you know, there are not many of us that are left. And so now it is our second, third generation, very, very important. Phoebe and my her sister and my grandson. And we must continue to involve teachers, send them to workshops, continue to support their work, because it is through the teachers that we will continue telling about that tragedy and hoping that in some little way, some young person might in their own life try to make a difference, because that is, that's our obligation. I see it as my personal obligation to remember.
I think we need, as you know, non-Jews to be involved in this process as well. And as Phoebe has said before, we have to make sure that people realize the Holocaust and genocide, that days that occurred for the Jews way back in the 30s and 40s. There are analogous situations that have occurred since then and before then. We have to keep that in our minds.
Correct.
And try not to use the Holocaust to justify, you know, violence against Palestinian people, because that's a real problem, I think, in Judaism right now.
We could spend 4 hours talking about that topic, Phoebe.
Just a quick plug, yeah.
or two.
Very complicated, as everything is.
You know, I do know that there's, you know, we can express those concerns and that attitude, but I want to thank you all for participating. You know, and I really think it really came across fairly well. Phoebe, I know you're not going to realize this, but that book, I think, will have a lasting impact.
Thank you so much for saying that.
Eva, the work that you have done over the years, since I've known you, it's extraordinary. And Hank knows that he's one of my idols, the battles he has fought and the things he has fought for as being in his religion and applying his religion to the lessons he's learned over the years. I look forward to seeing you all again sometime soon, and thank you for participating.
Thank you so much. Wonderful to see you, Marty. Of course, Phoebe, we'll talk sometime soon. And Hank, I'm looking forward to continue working with you.
Thank you to our panelists. Now we will host our annual candle lighting ceremony, completed by participating students from 6 different schools in Summit County, with a description of the meaning of the candle lighting prepared by Esther Hexter.
wish I could tell you every story has a happy ending.
Rabbi Josh Brown of Temple Israel, Akron, will complete a benediction to end this ceremony.
Shalom, I'm Rabbi Josh Brown from Temple Israel here in Akron, and I'm honored to be here to offer an opening benediction for us. I stand here next to our ark where we keep our sacred Torah scrolls, and particularly the scroll that is next to me, with the words in memory of the 6 million, a scroll that we hold extra tight today as we focus on what the Holocaust has to teach us about opposing hatred and cruelty. This scroll was in the Holocaust, and this scroll survived the Holocaust so that we could continue to read our story and continue to move forward, to look towards the future, and to fight against the hate opposing it as we looked toward life. I want to share the words of Rabbi Paul Kipnis, a dear colleague and mentor who encapsulated exactly what I think our words should be focused on today. He wrote that there was a moment at the Red Sea when our people despaired like never before. Looking behind, the people saw an enemy coming and chasing after them. But looking ahead, the waters seemed ready to swallow them up. To stand still was not an option. And so today we pray, Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu ve'imotenu, our God and God of our fathers and mothers, when our nation is divided, when our people are afraid, when our children are confused, when we ourselves are unsure of how to move forward in the face of hate, grant us, God, like Nachshon, the courage to face our fears and walk forward into the unknown. Like Miriam, the insight to find the hidden waters in the wilderness to quench our thirst. Like King Solomon, the wisdom to decide wisely as we face difficult decisions in the days and months ahead. Like the prophet Nathan, the faith to speak truth to power, demanding, as he did from King David, truth and justice, compassion and kindness. And may we, this community, know that we can lay down in our evenings at peace, and that we can rise up tomorrow refreshed and renewed, prepared to do the work of moving forward, to be resilient in the face of hate, and to know that we can pick our story up wherever it is and whatever we face, and carry it into the future so that future generations don't face the fears that we have today. May that be a blessing that we carry from this day in which we focus on the Holocaust and the lessons that it has to teach us about how we oppose hatred and cruelty. And as we come out of this virtual event, may we all walk forward into the future, carrying that story and knowing that that story brings us optimism and hope and the ability for future generations to find greater security in the face of our opposition toward hatred. Amen.
Thank you to everyone who joined us tonight as we remember those whose lives were lost in the Holocaust and honor the students for their hard work and impactful art and writing pieces. Thank you again to our panelists for their meaningful stories. As we end today's ceremony, we ask that you consider the question of our theme this year. what does the Holocaust teach us about opposing hatred and cruelty in your daily lives?